Welcome to a new webinar by Machinations. I'm Muhammad, and today we're going to be talking about shooting games. And usually we talk a lot about meta systems. Today, I'm super excited to be delving into moment-to-moment gameplay and how we can, diagram that out in Machinations. And we have a very special guest who will be joining us. So I'm Muhammad. I'm a game designer myself, and I handle game designer relations at Machinations. And with us here today is Alex. Alex, why don't you give us a nice intro?
Love the choice of photo, but then I guess that is my LinkedIn photo, so we go with it. Hey everybody, I'm Alex, senior game designer at Nitro Games. I've been working on mobile shooters for essentially my entire career. My whole 4 years in the industry has been on mobile shooters. I'm super excited to be talking to you guys about it today. And thank you very much for having me.
Cesar.
Yeah, I'm Cesar. I'm a diagram craftsman for the team. Those of you that have been attending our webinars regularly probably recognize me. I'll be assisting Mo's and Alex's conversations with some models that I prepared. We'll be looking at a couple of models today and see how the moment-to-moment gameplay can be translated into Machinations.
So, today we're going to be talking game design. At the end, we're going to turn off the recording and we're just going to bring people up and we can all talk game design together. That's always really fun. And if you have any questions, we'll take them at the end, but keep sending them throughout the whole conversation. Some of them, if they're asking about a specific context, question that has a specific context that's being discussed at a current moment, we might bring it up and answer that. But usually we'll leave the questions to the end. So thanks all for joining us. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen and we can begin.
So that's all on me, right? I better start talking. So, okay. So the content of the talk today, I've kind of split it out into a few sections that we're going to kind of go through. The first section, rather than diving straight into, obviously we're talking about mobile shooters, we're not going to dive straight into guns to begin with. We kind of need to sort of set the scene for context as to where players are going to be playing in. So we need to kind of talk about game modes. Most shooters have some form of game mode. There's normally one. Sometimes some have multiple, like Brawl Stars tends to have multiple. Pixel Gun 3D and Mech Arena are other examples of more. You can have any kind of game modes, from sort of your more standard deathmatch, team deathmatch. A lot of games, of course, have bought into the battle royale hype. So Garena Free Fire is essentially a full battle royale mode, battle royale mode game. Sorry, Zuba's the same. There's a lot of games that run a variant on battle royale. Others push more towards PvE modes. I know COD Mobile has brought their zombies mode into as sort of a limited option available mode to play. So PvE are also modes to explore, objective-based modes like Gem Rush from Brawl Stars, and the sort of mode that's very predominant in Frag Pro Shooter is also a very objective-based mode. The one that we sort of wanted to talk about today was control points / domination. I say / because it goes by a few different names. So that'll be the one that we're sort of diagramming out. The main idea is around the map, there are areas that you can capture. You capture them by standing within the area. If you stand in there with your teammates, the bar goes up. If an opponent comes in, then it stops. You stop capturing it, and you have to defeat your opponents in order to then gain the point and keep going. Holding the point for a length of time accrues points. First team to X number of points wins. So there's a couple of elements to consider with a game mode like this. Number of players being the first one. Let's assume that there are 5 players per team and 2 teams. So that means a total of 10 players you've got to matchmake into this game mode. That kind of follows the structure that Mech Arena have at the minute. Plarium's latest push into the market. Next, we move on to the player equipment. for the sake of ease of diagramming out and Cesar's sanity, let's assume that players come in and they've got one gun. More, of course, can be added later, but for simplicity of explaining through the diagram, let's stick with one for now. And then, of course, the actual control points themselves. From a level design point, you're obviously going to put them in kind of hot spots where you want conflict to take place, so you can kind of control the action in that way. But the number that you would have kind of depends on what you want to do. In COD Mobile, domination has 3, always A, B, C. So let's stick with 3 for now. As mentioned before, obviously, controlling the points is the main win con of the game. It doesn't matter how many opponents you defeat as long as you hold the point. And then finally, it's gunfights. So to define a gunfight, essentially, this is at any point where player A sees player B, picks up a gun, and shoots. A match can essentially have any number of these. It depends where they take place. They're very organic, but because of the game mode, you can kind of assume that it is going to take place around these hotspots more often than not. That will change up a few things, but dependent on whether some players are using long-range weapons, short-range weapons, but generally they're going to congregate around the points. So we're going to look at how to diagram those out a bit later as well. But yeah, so game mode. Cesar, do you have anything you wanted to show at this point, or do you want me to continue?
I can show the model that we have on control points. Then maybe we can go back and present the other just game modes as well. I only have the control points modeled, and it's a pretty high view. So I'm just going to share my screen right now.
Cool.
Hopefully everyone can see what I'm sharing. And this is essentially the model that Alex was talking before. It's a control point type of game. So your team has to control the point. There are 2 teams of 5 players. I'm going to have a red team and a blue team here. Each player will go for one of the 3 points, will attempt to capture them. Multiple players on the same point do not provide additional bonuses, so only one player needs to be there for the points to rack up. If there are opposing players on the same points, the points are contested, so nobody's getting points until only one team remains there. And when dying, players respawn and can choose to attack a different point. Now, the way in which players choose to attack the points is random at the moment. There's not a lot of logic involved into this, just for the sake of presentation. And one other thing I want to mention here is that the points are distributed so for instance, point 1 here is closer to the red team, and point 3 on the other side is closer to the blue team. So it's easier for those teams to contest the points that are closer to them. It takes less time for players to arrive at that point and contest them. And point 2 is straight in the middle of the map, where both teams have to go through the same distance to get there. I'm just going to run this step by step, so it's going to make more sense when I run it step by step, and we're going to see what happens. So during the first step, I'm just going to generate 5 different players for each team. We're going to have the red tokens signify the red team and the blue tokens signify the blue team. Now, during the next step, each of the player in the 2 teams is going to attack one of the 3 points. It's going to be done randomly. Chances, the way I constructed the chances is they are equal in the beginning, and later on, if a team, let's say the red team, has multiple players on the same point, newer players that respawn will try to attack different points. So they try to cover a larger area of the map instead of all going on the same point. So let's see how they distribute first. They're going to go through the gates. You can see that 3 red players chose to attack point 1. The other ones disappeared because they are going for the more distant points. So they are still on the map. You're going to see in the next step, 4 blue players chose to attack point 2. And now 2 red players are on point 3 and 1 blue player is on point 1. So points 2 and 3 at the moment, because of the way players went, are uncontested. So the teams will be racking up points. Both blue and red are racking up points for this reason. Point 1 is contested. So none of the teams are getting points at the moment. Now I'm going to close up on this particular case. I just made a simple logic here that during each step, there's a 20% chance for each team to lose one team member. So they get killed on the point there. If I hit step, at some point, one of them is going to trigger that 20%. There we go. A red player was killed. They are going back to respawn. Point 1 is still contested because we still have blue players in there. Now the red one will choose a new point to go to. And he picked point 3. They're going to get there in some time. Meanwhile, the blue player in here died. So now point 1 is uncontested and the red team is gaining points. You can see at the top here that we've been giving the teams points during each step according to what point is contested and what point is not contested. Once we get to 100, the first team that gets to 100 wins. Because blue chose a bad tactic of all going on point 2, the other points are uncontested. So the red team is going to take this one home, as you can see. So the red team wins. Now, if we are to do, let me just do a quick refresh. If we are to do a new execution here, the results will be different because the players will be distributed differently throughout all of the 3 points. So the idea is that the players, as Alex mentioned, one very important aspect of this game mode is that kills are really not that important, are just a secondary indication. What is important is controlling the different points. Oh, by the way, spoilers for later. What is important is controlling the different points and generating those points for your team. So I'm just going to hit play this time and just let the model do its thing. We're going to see different players attacking different points. Most of the points were contested, but now red is winning on multiple points. Blue is taking it back now. You can see that they're generating points on the top here for both teams. All points are contested at the moment. Blue now has point 2. So you can see building a logic like this is possible. Now you may want to consider multiple, there are multiple things to consider here. One would be the fact that my chances here are constant 20% to 20% for someone to die. Now we can model this so that if a team has more players in a point, obviously there's a higher chance that that team will be successful in killing the opposition, because if you go into a 1v3, you're generally going to lose unless you're some mobile god gamer. So we could apply that logic here. One other thing we could consider is the distance between points. So we can make it so that they're further away. At the moment, it only takes one extra step for players to reach further points and 2 extra steps for the furthest one. We can also consider how many points they get while they're occupying. We can consider the limit that they need to reach to win. We can put a respawn cooldown, so they don't respawn on the spot. They have to wait for like 30 seconds or something, which is again valuable time. So a lot of things to consider here. But basically, this is how the logic of such a game would look like. Obviously, we can have way more points than just 3. We can have way bigger teams than just 5 players. But the logic is pretty similar. Now, I'm not reading chat, so if anyone has questions about what I modeled here, please let me know so I can answer.
No questions so far. If you do have any questions, submit them in the Q&A, and we'll get to them. So, Cesar, should we continue, or is there anything else you want to go over?
In this particular game type, no, we can continue with the rest of the game types and come back to the gunfighting when it's appropriate.
Perfect. So actually, I want to touch on something very interesting, because when we talk about capture points, there's 2 kinds of capture points you can design. Well, the first one is the point-based system that Cesar diagrammed, where you have usually an odd number of control points, and when you have more players from one side on that control point, that team starts racking up points. And then there's another type of control point game mode, which is attack and defense, where, you know, there's a team that's designated to attack and a team that's designated to defend. And once a control point has been successfully attacked, by having more players stay on that control point of the attacking team more than the defending team for a particular amount of time, what happens is that control point gets captured and players must then move on to the second control point. So Alex, could you give us sort of like a breakdown of the two differences, what you're looking for when you're trying to design for either one, and the objective you're trying to get out of it for players to have fun, and also the best practices for each?
Wonderful question. I will do my best to answer it properly. So for a more, let's call it a more like open-ended style that Cesar has diagrammed, that's sort of like the domination COD style of control points, where a player spawns and they're kind of free to pick whichever point they want to push for. Say one of them's being captured that's particularly close to their spawn, or they want to push forward and try and attack opponents. Players are going to be far more focused on objective at this point. They're specifically making decisions as to how easily they can take over a specific point, or whether they need to dynamically move and attack another. B might have 3 defenders on it already, so let's ignore that and go to C where there's only 1. Those are a bit more decisions players are going to make. It's, at least from what I've seen, players are going to specifically try and play a little bit more on their own as well, and bunch up a bit more if they're completely being dominated. For something that's a bit more objective focused, I guess it's similar to the control points in Overwatch, for example. That kind of focuses solely to team play, and it works really well on Overwatch's side because, of course, it's a hero-based game. If you pick a healer and somebody else picks damage, somebody else picks, I don't know, like a sniper, like Widowmaker or something, you're always trying to play off of each other. So it's a lot better to kind of like focus players onto a single point at that point. It's also why the payload game mode in Overwatch works really well as well, because you've got a balance between, okay, I need to put certain players here, and then I need to have other players over here, and it's far more of a discussion about whether the dynamic of the team is right. Best practices for balancing for both. For an Overwatch style, I would say specifically, since it works more for like a hero-based, for sort of like a hero-based structure, I'd say try and make sure that all of your heroes have strengths and weaknesses. Like Reinhardt's really good at sucking up damage and like area denial, but absolutely sucks at long-range fighting. Widow's great at long range, although with that said, she's not bad if you catch her off guard. She's pretty good actually. And then, you know, a Mercy needs to be around her team in order to be the most effective. So for that, I would say balance for strengths and weaknesses. For something that's a bit more open-ended, like domination in Call of Duty, you're always going to be, you should still balance sort of strengths and weaknesses, but always try and make those, whatever play style a player goes for, have some kind of like agility to it. If a player finds themselves in a situation in COD where, okay, cool, my sniper is not helping me out, at least you can switch to a secondary and try and take point if, as Cesar said, you're a mobile god gamer, or move to a point organically. So having that ability to switch is a little more important. It's why you tend to see domination in more sort of, another example would be Critical Ops, which is kind of another very hardcore style mobile shooter. You would switch from primary to secondary if you found yourself in a situation that was detrimental to where you are. Yeah, I think. Does that answer your question? Is that the best? I think that's a solid answer at least. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay.
I do want to make one quick mention because I saw a question in the chat, which was if we're using that randomization to actually do simulations and try to find out, try to do game balancing is the right way to go. No, I wouldn't use that for balancing. I did do it randomized just because it was an easier way to automate it and present it to just as an abstract model for today. If I were to try and balance it thoroughly, I would probably implement some sort of player intelligence in there. So I would test against different cases. What happens when 4 players attack point 2 from one team and one player goes for the third point, for instance, and the other ones all clutter on point 1, let's say. So I would probably have some sort of intelligence in there and try and test against those different cases, do some quick plays and see if the outcome is the one that I desire. So I feel like if all of one team clutters on a single point, they should be punished for it, because the idea of the game is to spread out your team across the map. And if I see that by cluttering your team on a single point, you still win the game, that's obviously a problem. So there's something I need to adjust there. That's how I would go about balancing this type of game. And another question that I saw was that if we have heroes and gimmicks, sort of like Overwatch, like Alex mentioned, for today, the model that I chose to do is based on a realist type of shooter like Call of Duty, however realist that can be. But just having soldiers with weapons, real life weapons, and not really heroes with ability skills, those can be incorporated. And Mo actually answered that by saying that you can have sort of a power level. You can also have different gimmicks. So for instance, Reinhardt, like Alex mentioned, can have a shield that can reduce the damage that they take, for instance, for that particular player. Implementing powers would probably be something that you need to do per character, and you'd have to build out every character as such in Machinations and have them and then pit them out one against the other. So it's a bit more complicated with heroes than just with standard people that all have the same weapons that they can purchase. But it can be done, especially since hero type games usually don't have that many heroes, with the exception of, I mean, especially for shooters, usually don't have that many heroes. So it's perfectly possible.
Yeah, for sure. You guys mentioned that we wanted to talk a little more on other game modes. We want to open up about deathmatch, team deathmatch, battle royale. We want to talk PvE. That all right with you guys? Cool.
Sounds good, Alex. Guide us through it.
Okay, so deathmatch, team deathmatch are your pretty, as I sort of mentioned earlier, they're your bog standard kind of game modes. Most shooters have this in some form. Everything from Mech Arena to COD Mobile has some form of deathmatch or team deathmatch. Essentially, just you put players in a room and say, "Cool, go kill each other." The downside with these modes, well, the upside for these modes is they're really simple to actually communicate to a player. It's really obvious. There's just like, hey, here's a weapon. There's somebody moving. Why don't you go and shoot and see what happens? It's really easy to just communicate the overall mode, but it can become very repetitive very quickly. It's also a lot more difficult to balance for both player skill and, especially in mobile, actually meta upgrades and power upgrades. Because something like a deathmatch, it's very obvious when, say, let's say I've got a level 5 gun and you've got a level 2 gun. You might be really good, but I'm probably still going to out-damage you if I'm halfway competent. And deathmatch and team deathmatch often highlight those things. That's why you often see sort of newer mobile shooters trying to focus on more objective modes. So Frag Pro Shooter, for an example, if anybody's played Clash Royale, essentially Frag Pro Shooter is Clash Royale as an FPS. With like cartoon ideas ramped up to 11. It contains a musician with a guitar that shoots electricity at you, and a woman in a unicorn onesie with a cupcake that explodes. I'm not even kidding. The game is mad, but it's really fun. But the focus on that mode is each team has 3 bunkers. If you blow up all 3 bunkers, you win. Or if you deal enough damage to their bunkers while defeating opponents, you also win. So that's far more focused on, okay, you can have whatever you want. You could have a hero that's, say, 3 levels higher than me, but I'm just going to ignore you, and I'm just going to go over and I'm going to punch your bunkers. And suddenly there's far more elements for a player to think about. And because it's a very specific game mode, it's kind of the pull for the sort of like the novelty pull, the novelty hook kind of thing. So that's deathmatch, that's objective mode. I can't really not mention Battle Royale. So I mentioned Garena, Free Fire, and Zuba. Both of these are different games that focus on Battle Royale as a game mode. They, as far as I'm aware from both of these, only have one game mode, and that's Battle Royale. Garena, Free Fire is essentially PUBG on mobile. Even PUBG Mobile is relatively similar to it. It's very hardcore. There's a lot of buttons on screen. But a lot of hardcore players really enjoy the kind of the complexity of it and the fact that you can just pull it out at any point. Zuba takes it the same mode in a complete opposite direction. So Zuba is a bit more top-down, kind of pushing the idea of a shooter a little bit. You play as zoo animals. So who doesn't love playing as a gorilla versus a fox, I guess. And it's a lot more slower paced. It's much more focused on positioning. Loot and weapons that you pick up are relatively easy to use, and games don't take longer than 3 minutes. So there's a lot of breadth, especially with sort of the simplicity of a battle royale mode. There's a lot that you can do with it, and a lot of mobile games sort of push that to any particular degree. One of the simplest battle royale implementations I've seen has been Brawl Stars. Since they have their kind of showdown, they just put heroes in and say, cool, go. It's a room that shrinks, and there are things that increase your health and damage around. That's the simplest implementation of Battle Royale I've seen, at least. The only other thing that I didn't mention previously are things like tournament modes. So games sometimes, dependent on the implementation, some games have these as set modes. At least for now, Plarium's Mech Arena has their tournament mode as a team deathmatch mode. Whereas in others, it can change depending on the flavor of the week of whatever they want to rank players on. And this is normally your kind of hardcore ranking, hardcore competition kind of style of doing things, where matchmaking matters a lot more. You've got to make sure players are kind of on roughly the same level playing field. And it's more of a test of skill as opposed to what I guess you could say would be the more progression-based gameplay you'd see in general modes. Not every game has a specific tournament mode. Pixel Gun 3D and Mech Arena are the two examples that come to my mind that have it in. But yeah, dependent on the audience, it can be a great thing or it can be a detriment. Depends who's playing at the end of the day. But yeah. Yeah, I believe that is, I'm looking up and down my script. Yeah, I've got a script for this because I'm not known for my skills at public speaking. I believe that's everything we've got for game modes. Happy to move on to guns?
Yep.
Glorious. So we can't really have a webinar about mobile shooters without talking about guns. So for the purpose of the diagram that Cesar's put together, we're going to start with 4 types of guns. So let's cover the basics. You've got your pistols. Let's say, for example, this thing has a average amount of ammo in it, doesn't fire particularly quickly, relatively accurate, low damage, pretty quick. In most games, sidearms like a pistol will move faster than anything else. But otherwise not massively useful. If you pull a pistol out and someone's got a shotgun, you're probably not going to win that matchup. But they're very much, weapons like this are very much a staple at this point since, GoldenEye on the the Nintendo 64. Then we've got your machine guns, high ammo, fast fire rate, low damage per bullet, but with the sheer amount of them, that chip damage is going to add up over time. probably on the average accuracy part, just because the kickback's going to be quite a lot, but they're more focused on speed and agility. Think like a submachine gun in Call of Duty. Guns like this, specifically on mobile, are normally favored by more skilled players, players that really enjoy like the Twitch-based Twitch-based gameplay, forgive me, will normally pump up their sensitivity a little bit, pick up a fast-moving machine gun like this, and kind of just strafe their way through games. If you've got the skill to do it, then that sounds great, because games and weapons like this are normally balanced with low health, so they'll fall over like a paper bag if somebody breathes on them, kind of thing. And then on the opposite end of that spectrum, we've got shotguns. So low ammo, slow fire rate, again, probably not brilliant accuracy, but very high damage, multiple bullets per single shot. If you hit someone with it, it's going to do massive damage. But between shots, because the fire rate is so spread out, it's you're a lot more vulnerable during that time. You also tend to move a little slower sometimes to balance out the sheer power of these things. And then finally, you've got a sniper rifle. So sniper rifles kind of represent their own style of play. Again, average ammo, slow fire rate, very high accuracy, very high damage. These are favored by players that like to take the high ground, as Obi-Wan Kenobi said, and take out opponents from a long range. They're really solid in objective-based modes too, especially control point domination. When a point is unmoving and players are going to go there, sniper rifles definitely thrive. Again, they're also favored by skilled players, because normally to aim and hit accurately with them and still position yourself in a way that you're kind of safe from the majority of return fire is a skill in and of itself. These aren't the exact ways that you have to tackle, say, a sniper rifle like this or a shotgun like that. These are more conventions. There are games that break these. I've definitely played my share of games where the shotgun is like the fastest weapon on the board, and fires ridiculously quickly. So it depends really what your game needs and what you're trying to emphasize. But for a more realistic shooter, there are a set of conventions about how these weapons would work in reality that players do almost expect. But yeah, so with those four weapons in mind, Cesar, do you want to show off your PvP model, my friend?
Yes, I do, in just a second, because I forgot to name one last node in here. Okay, now that I named it and I'm not making a fool of myself, I'm gonna first talk about a specific thing and then gonna move to the whole model. Essentially what I modeled here, you're gonna see on the right, is sort of a PvP scenario where two players encounter each other. They have different weapons, or the same weapon for that matter, and they start having at each other until one of them dies. Now, the four weapons that we have here are the ones that Alex was talking about, which are the pistol, the machine gun, the shotgun, and the sniper rifle. What I want to show here is an implementation that anyone can use, where you can have your guns be modeled in a sort of a dynamic way. You can see on my left here, I have an interactive register. I named it choose weapon. 1 is going to be the pistol, 2 is going to be the machine gun, 3 is going to be the shotgun, and 4 is going to be the sniper rifle. I have a list on the top here with the characteristics of these weapons. So the damage that they deal, their clip size, fire rate, reload speed, accuracy, and mobility. Accuracy and mobility are kind of tied to each other. The more mobility a player has, the less accurate their opponent are going to be against them, because they keep moving around. And if I hit play right now, for instance, you're going to see, because I have the pistol chosen and I look into my list of values here at the top, I am able to select all of the characteristics for my current weapon. So my pistol is going to have 40 damage. It's going to have a clip size of 10, fire rate of 30, reload speed of 5, accuracy of 70, which is quite high, but the pistol is quite accurate, and mobility of 90, as Alex mentioned, pistols are kind of the mobility weapon. You kind of move fastest when you have a pistol equipped, assuming there's no knife in your game. Now, if I were to switch the interactive register in here, you're going to see that I'm switching now to my machine gun, and all of the numbers are switching accordingly to all of the characteristics for the current weapon. So if I do so for shotgun and for sniper rifle as well, I can freely move between the four. Now, I never encourage anyone to do this during executions. It's generally bad practice to switch them during executions. But it is an easy way to have them switched before the execution starts. So my player in this game will play with a pistol, but now I want him to play with a machine gun. So I'm going to switch this to, with a shotgun. So I'm going to switch this to a 3. And now when I enter the game, the player has a shotgun equipped. You're going to see a low damage on the shotgun. That is because, as Alex mentioned, shotguns fire multiple bullets. So I am actually looking at the damage of each bullet. The shotgun is kind of special in the sense that it fires multiple bullets at the same time, unlike the other weapons. So having multiple pellets here is going to mean that the shotgun actually has quite the decent damage. So moving on to the model, I have two basically identical players in here. The only thing that's going to differ between them is the weapons that they equip. I'm just going to talk briefly about what's going on here. Then we're going to hit play and explain what's going on. I have my numbers that I showed earlier in here. So when I pick a weapon, it's going to give me those characteristics of the weapon. My player 1 is going to have a machine gun because it's number 2. And my player 2 is going to have a shotgun because we have a 3 in here. So at each, if I hit step right now, for instance, we're going to generate the ammo clip of 30. We're going to have a fire rate of 60. So that means this, again, is about how you choose to make your model. For instance, my model now is kind of slow, as in a step is quite, let's say, not much time in real time. I would call it maybe half a second or something. So a machine gun is going to fire 2 bullets per step. You can see here in the gate. So if I hit step right now, the machine gun is going to fire 2 times. I have an accuracy which accounts with for the weapon accuracy and accounts for the other player's mobility. So with both those in mind, there's a chance that the player will miss, will hit a leg or an arm shot, which usually deals less damage. He deals a body shot, which usually deals normal damage, and a headshot, which usually deals a lot of damage. I made it so it's double damage. It can be even more than double, but yeah. So you can see that the first 2 bullets, our machine gun player missed both. But because of the giant clip size, and even though they're missing a lot, because they're firing so often and firing a lot of bullets, they sometimes hit the player. And when they do, it inflicts damage on them. So what happens when they hit a body shot in here? I'm looking at all of the areas of the opponent's body that my player has hit. And I'm deducting that from the player's HP. So because player 1 hit a 24, I'm going to reduce player 2's HP by 24 in here. So this is basically the idea of the gunfight. Now, we also have a reload in here. If I were to finish my ammo clip in here, I'm just going to hit resume for a bit. My reload's going to come in. I'm going to give my player back. I forgot to switch the number here. It should be 30, but you get the point. After 4 steps, it's going to come back and the player is able to fire again. So we have all of these in here. If we hit play and just look at the 2 players' HPs at the moment, we have both of them. We can see if a weapon is strong or not. Now, obviously, this doesn't account for every situation in the game, but we can see that player 2 is kind of getting pummeled here, which is a problem. So player 2, the one wielding the shotgun, got destroyed by the player with the machine gun. Now, in most shooter games, there are a lot of factors that come in play here, because obviously there is cover, for instance. So a player that is behind a box will have an advantage. There is the element of surprise, right? Because you can find someone that's not looking at you and fire away at them. So you're most likely going to win that encounter. there is the very important element of distance, because a shotgun, as Alex mentioned, is a high damage weapon. But when you're facing a player that's far away from you, you actually will barely scratch them with the shotgun. It's very ineffective at a distance. So Alex mentioned that a shotgun, if a pistol player meets a shotgun player, the pistol player is probably going to lose. But that's also kind of dependent on distance, because if they're very far away from each other, the pistol player has a chance, because the shotgun player will it's very unlikely to hit the pistol player. While the pistol has decent accuracy, so it's gonna damage, chip away at the shotgun player. If I hit another simulation here, maybe my shotgun player just got unlucky. Maybe the result will be different right now. We're gonna see that the duel is a bit more equal right now, but still the shotgun player is in trouble. Now we can have a look at the shotgun player just to see what's happening with him. They have their own numbers. The way I mentioned is that shotguns fire multiple bullets. So because they have a low ammo clip, they have only 5 bullets, but that bullet is actually splitting into multiple pellets when fired. So it's gonna split into 7, which we have here. Now they also have a slow fire rate, so they're not gonna be firing at every step. The machine gun was firing 2 bullets per step. The shotgun is only gonna fire every 3 steps, you can see. And it splits the pellets, which have pretty low accuracy. And even though they are hitting, just hitting with some of the bullets doesn't account for a lot of damage. So that's why the shotgun is pretty much in trouble if they meet a machine gun at, let's say, medium range. Now, what I can do in here to try and make this a bit more even is change one of the parameters in here. So let's say fire rate. Let's say I want to give the shotgun a better fire rate. Currently, they have it at 20, so it's pretty slow firing. I'm just going to switch the 20 and make it 30, let's say. Just switch it up by 10. So right now, I'm just making the shotgun shoot a bit faster. Let's see if that has any influence on the way the duel goes at the moment. So I'm just going to hit play again. We're going to watch at the 2 players' HPs. Now we can see that it's pretty even. Still, the machine gun is winning. It looks a bit more even than before. So maybe there we go. The machine gun still won. It was a bit of a closer deal. So the shotgun still probably needs some buffs, but you can imagine that we can tweak and adjust more of the numbers in there, so the shotgun gets an advantage. Now, keep in mind, this is a situation where 2 players are facing off in an environment where there are no blocking, let's say, assets. There are no visibility issues, so they are just in a skill matchup, so to speak. As I said, there are a lot of factors that can be accounted into this. I didn't include them in the model not to make it too heavy. Factors like cover can be included. Factors like player skill can be included, because player skill is quite the important one. Factors like experience with the map. So a lot of these can be inflicted in here. But this is basically a basic gunfight between 2 players. Now, to also address a question that was earlier with the heroes, you see, by making a sort of a generic realistic shooter, I can just switch between my weapons before the start of an execution in here. So now if I want my player to play a sniper rifle, I just switch it to 4. So now I can easily switch between the types of weapons that I want. If I were to have heroes in here, probably each one of my heroes would look something like this. Obviously, it can be made probably to look better than what I did here, but each of my heroes would kind of have to look like this, because they all have their own specifics. They all have their own unique powers, unique skill set, especially if there are heroes that have, I don't know, skills as well as ultimate skills. So the more skills you add, the more variety you're going to have, and the more you're going to need to single out that hero in a construction like this. But if you're doing a realistic type of game where only the players are kind of the same, but only the weapon switches, and the only thing that you care about in a player is if they are good at the game or not, then that's much easier to do. You can just have a list like this and switch between the different weapons or players. If there are any questions about this model.
Yeah, so there's a very interesting question, Cesar, which is how long it took you to build that prototype.
This one, I will confess, I started building it about 2 hours before this webinar, and I finished building it like 10 minutes before the webinar. So about 2 hours, I would say. The most difficult part of doing such a model is settling for how abstract you want it to be. So for instance, in my initial point control model, I spent a lot of time thinking, how much do I want to go in depth here? Because I was considering at some point making it so that the numbers actually influence the chances of someone dying. So if there are more players on a point, that team has the advantage. Then I decided that it's probably going to make the model a bit too beefy. So let's just make that abstract and make the model a bit lighter. So this is probably the hardest part, that is actually the beginning, where you want to decide what do you want to abstract and what do you want to be really thorough with. Because if you don't really care about some aspects, it's not really important to make the effort to model it, because it can be cumbersome in some cases. So if something is not that important, you can make it so it's basically a chance or a random gate or something. If it is important, however, you definitely want to spend the time to figure it out. So for my weapons, I definitely knew that all of the 6 parameters in here are important for every weapon. So there's no way I can make it abstract. I have to include this in the model, and I have to make them important in some way or another. So it all comes down to you. But obviously experience helps a lot.
Nice. So actually, I wanted to ask you, Alex, a question, because when we sort of look at designing weapons and making them fun, I wanted to sort of ask a few questions. The first is, how do you create items, in this case weapons, that feel satisfying for players to use and play with? So I think that's the first main question. Outside of kinesthetics and aesthetics and visual audio feedback, just with gameplay. The second thing is, as a designer, do you have any specific objectives when you're looking at these items and you're thinking, I want players to play in a specific styles. I want them to use maybe this weapon more or this weapon less. And the third question, and I think it's the beefiest one, is how do you deal with the meta? How do you make it so that players aren't being cornered and forced to play something that maybe doesn't fit their style because they want to perform well, but actually make it so that players are confident using loadouts that suit their play style and that they can enjoy playing with?
Okay. Wow, you gave me all 3 questions at once. Forgive me. Could you say them again? What's question 1?
Right. So let's just take them one by one. So question 1 was, how do you design satisfying, in this case, weapons, items in general? How do you make them feel good for players beyond the kinesthetics and the aesthetics and just pure gameplay design?
Yeah. So of course, the first aspect is the one you kind of already mentioned, is like making sure that weapon has strong visuals, gets decent feedback. The thing mainly from gameplay is kind of, if you want something to be satisfying, it needs to have a purpose. So let's say, for example, you're making a pistol, and the pistol is really, really fast, but it's got like really low damage and really low health. This could feel brilliant if players can use it to duck around cover a lot, as Cesar was mentioning earlier, and get a few hits off while, say, going to an objective. However, if in reality and through testing, players are trying to use it as a full frontal assault weapon, and they're trying to take down people with shotguns and rocket launchers and whatever, and they're getting blown out of the sky, then that gun that was satisfying in one situation becomes unsatisfying in another. So it depends very much on what your situations are and and in a way what objective you're going for. One of the things that I'm looking at specifically right now is making weapons that are useful in specific game modes. So, for example, going back to the low damage, low health, speedy pistol, let's say that's going to be really good in a mode where you kind of need to, like Brawl Stars Gem Rush, for example, where you have to run into the middle, pick up a couple things, and then run away again. That might be an interesting playstyle that somebody really resonates with and really wants to go for. But then if you brought it into a team deathmatch, you're probably just going to get mowed down by a load of AK-47s, for example. So as long as the weapon has a purpose, and trying to design around that purpose is at least what I've tried to do in the past. You can always push things by, okay, this weapon just feels boring to use, so I'm going to push its power. But players normally, that kind of links into, I guess, what I'd answer for the third question, because that's when players are just like, oh, well, this weapon's clearly pushed, so I'm going to use it, kind of thing. So it's kind of like a tool you can use, but use it sparingly, kind of thing. I think that would be my best answer for question one. So question two was...
Yeah, so that actually links very well into my second question, which is when you're designing, these items for players, and you're talking about objectives right now, do you think of, sort of like building parameters for players to use certain, in this case, weapons in specific scenarios, and maybe you want players to, use this weapon in a given scenario or that weapon in another scenario? Or do you sort of like design more, free-flowing and see, work backwards from the data and see how players are using it and then start iterating from there?
To be fair, like, in a way, those are two tools that you can use at any point. It depends on the projects that you're with, which sounds like such a cop-out answer. But so there will be sometimes, there have been projects in my past where specifically I've been designing weapons and I've been solely designing them with purpose in mind, but haven't been forcing that purpose. So let's say, for example, in Critical Ops, for example, it's kind of like CSGO on mobile kind of thing. You know that a sniper rifle is going to be great for long range, and you know that an SMG is just going to have lower range. But players can still come in and they can still kind of push those expectations themselves, and that can lead to scenarios where Call of Duty, people running around with a sniper rifle as if it's a shotgun and insta sniping and like one-shotting anybody that's within 100-meter radius. And if you just give the kind of like the parameters, the purpose, but don't force it, that can create some very interesting and often unexpected scenarios. And for a player, they're really fun to explore. They can, on the other side though, be game breaking. So if you had the same situation in Overwatch, I don't have a specific example in my mind. I have to admit, I haven't played much Overwatch in a long time. But let's say, for example, a healer has suddenly become a damage dealer. I think Zen Yate was this at one point, where you wouldn't pick a healer to heal people. You would pick him to charge up shots and take people out from around corners. And that completely throws off how your teammates are going to play around that kind of strategy. Because the game's going to tell you, oh, you've got 3 healers. You really don't want 3 healers. But really, you've got 4 damage dealers and then 1 tank, depending on how people are going to play it. Again, it can be something that players really love to find, but it can also be detrimental to the overall metagame. Of course, to make sure on the other side, you can always force it. There are many mobile games that they kind of build this depth in loadout systems, in meta systems, and then they kind of push you to use it. I'm trying to think of an example off the top of my head. Let's take the loadout in Zuba. So in Zuba, they really want you to use a melee weapon, a grenade, and a weapon, and a gun of some kind, or a bow. If you pick up a weapon and then you find another weapon later, you can't pick up both of them. You've only got that one weapon. You have to go and find a grenade now, or you have to go and find a sword. So that can be really good for pushing like by pushing players to explore the diversity of your systems, because they're kind of forced to. And that can be really useful. It's used a lot in mobile games, again, to kind of make sure that when depth is built, players are for sure to experience it. Especially with mobile, where you can hop in, play the tutorial of a game and then leave. There are a lot of discussions about making sure that players are exposed to as much of the game as possible. So it depends really what your project needs and what it goes for. At the minute, I'm trying to go more for an open-ended approach, and then just let players see what happens, and then design around those things. And then, of course, especially in PvP shooters, you're going to be balancing these stat sheets for the rest of your life. Something will always rise as a dominating strategy, or you'll introduce a weapon that you pushed a little too much, and you're just going to have to work around it. That's always going to be the case. But yeah, and then your third question was something about meta.
Right. So yeah, we actually have quite a few questions lined up from the audience. So I'll just ask my third question and then we can dive right into those. Is that okay with you, Alex?
Sounds grand. Let's go.
Perfect. So my third question is, related to the meta, where players are sort of, once the meta is figured out, players are sort of forced to, play the meta, and maybe their play style is different from the meta. Their loadouts are different. How do you make it so that players avoid being meta slaves and that they can feel confident playing the loadout they prefer, and still have a great time and still perform well in competitive matches?
That's purely by game balance. If you're in a situation, again, going back to the critical ops example, because critical ops, you can equip whatever weapon you want. You can run in with whatever primary, secondary, grenade, knife, whatever you want to use. And if one starts to, in the same way that in a card game like Hearthstone, one deck can become meta-defining because it's too powerful, you need to balance around it. And if your game is a game that kind of enables players to make those choices and use what they want, then it's very important to make sure that those choices are valid and interesting. If it's not, and let's say, for example, shotguns are just too pushed and they're just too powerful, then players are only going to use them, and then they're not going to want to play against them. In a mobile game, that's normally a churn point. That's where you, there have been a few games where I've noticed where players have outright churned because, say, this shotgun, I balanced a weakness into this gun, but it's not big enough to actually make it beatable. And then it just becomes this massive thing that completely destroys meta. So it's all about making sure it's balanced. Although with that said, sometimes you want to, especially in a live game, sometimes you actually want to kind of control the meta. So let's say, for example, you would push a particular strategy for a little while, and then later you'd shift it. And that can be interesting too. Like that can be an interesting space for players to explore with. Like the meta doesn't always have to be solved; it has to be evolving. Again, a card game example, Magic the Gathering, of course, does this with standard rotation. Sometimes cards just go out and you have to use different ones. Hearthstone does the same. And there's no reason why weapon balance can't be treated in the same way. However, it's more tolerable to use in mobile games than it is in PC, by my understanding. Mobile games can get away with a little bit more of a shift in things, mainly because player attention changes. In a PC game in Call of Duty, if they nerfed, say, a particular SMG that I'm really, really interested in playing, I'd riot. But if they kind of did the same in a mobile game, I'd be like, okay, we can shift to something else. And that's mainly down to the simplicity of playstyles too. A lot of the time in mobile games, weapons are built around the same system. So like the stats that we mentioned in the diagram, every blaster, like Nerf guns, every weapon will have the same stats. So you can and the way of using them is the same. So that if a player picks up a shotgun and then if a player picks up a machine gun, they can kind of see how it feels and what kind of playstyle they like, but they're not outright shunned from changing playstyles if they want to. And in a lot of mobile games, they try and push that so that players are interested in trying out more content. Yeah. That's my answer.
I just want to mention that it's we are at time technically. I think it's the moment to take questions, right, Mo?
Oh, have we already run out of time?
Alex, is there anything you want to go over before we open to the Q&A?
Yeah.
Oh my word. The only thing that I think would be, you know what? From a, do you mind if I briefly touch on supporting systems for a second?
Absolutely.
So
absolutely, go ahead. Not absolutely.
So supporting systems. One of the things that is mainly prevalent in a lot of mobile games, and PC games as well, I guess, supporting systems to gunfights. My definition of this is essentially anything that affects gameplay that isn't a gun. So it's kill streaks and your choice of operator in COD Mobile, the choice of mech you want to use in Mech Arena and what weapons you want to give to it. But of course, because that's a weapon, I'd say the mech itself be your choice. Your choice of grenade in Critical Ops. Even something as abstract as like when to tell your teammates to attack or defend in a game of Frag. These are on top of cover, map knowledge, weapon playstyle knowledge, just overall player twitch skill with the platform. Can make an enormous difference in a gunfight. And of course, you can diagram all of these things out. It's a little more complicated to do so, but yeah, there's always going to be some sort of novelty in there and some kind of system to go through or progression system to push for, especially in mobile games, to make choices a bit more interesting and enables us to push certain playstyles without actually even touching weapon balance in a way. You know, maybe it's meta to use particularly high damaging people and then just tell them to attack right in the onset rather than letting them defend. Or you would use fast mechs with heavy weapons as opposed to large mechs with heavy weapons for the movement ability, the movement push. It depends. So there's a lot of additional systems on top of shooters that can that provide the player with interesting decisions and interesting choices to make. Yeah. Otherwise, we can. Yeah, I ran through that pretty quick, but otherwise, we can throw the script out the window and let's talk about games.
Right.
Who's making a fool of themselves.
So yeah, we actually got a bunch of really cool questions. I think the first one is
Can I take the, sorry Mo, can I take the sim first? Because there is one particular question that I want to answer before I forget, and it's connected to Machinations, and I want to take it off my chest. So
go for it.
I see there's one in the Q&A which is kind of the same. So is where do you find Machinations is the most useful in your development process, and how much do you maintain it once you have working software? I'm struggling to mentally place it in a nice spot given the abstraction decisions that need to be made. If I don't have a playable prototype, are my abstractions of value or appropriate levels of detail? Which is kind of also asked in the Q&A, where you can, how would you use Machinations to account for enemy dependent skills? When skills depend on the state skill of the enemy, for example, the 6 Genji strats in Overwatch, where they reflected damage back to the enemy. So one thing I want to address is about Machinations and shooters in general. So in today's webinar, we chose an approach of, as Mo said, moment to moment. So the actual gameplay, player encounters, what's happening on the map. So we're looking exclusively at the gameplay inside of the shooter. Now, from a Machinations point of view, or at least my experience with Machinations, I would say that modeling a type of shooter games are always going to be highly skill dependent. So you can set the environment for certain strategies, you can set the weapons, you can set the objectives, but the better players are usually going to win because it is a highly skill dependent type of game. So in Machinations, the way I would bring that into the workflow of specific gameplay is just make sure that nothing is completely overpowered. So at least from a weapon point of view, I am giving the players sort of equal chances, right? If they are equally skilled and have sort of the same behaviors, they will get kind of equal chances, because player skill will always be such a major factor in this that there's no way that you're gonna be able to account for this accurately. Now, with that being said, that is the gameplay part, but a shooter game, aside from the gameplay part, has also the meta systems, which we deliberately chose to ignore today. Those are way better suited for Machinations, for instance, because I remember a question from earlier when someone asked if I have a stamina system and a game takes 20 stamina and I give the player rewards for wins, but I cap it at 10 wins. So stuff like that, maybe stuff like battle passes, weapon chests, all of these are way better, way easier actually to design in Machinations, and way easier to model and abstract, because they are working mechanisms. They don't really have that much randomness into it, right? Because you don't really care what the player is doing during the game. You only care if they win or not. So that can just be made into a simple gate with win or lose. And once they win, you see what happens. Once they lose, you see what happens. You can implement the win rate in there, and you can see the rewards that the players can get. So from a meta system point of view, I would say Machinations is more suited for shooters. Moment to moment you can do as well. You can do like I've showed it today. You can choose the level of abstraction that you want, but it's never going to bring you the perfect balance into moment to moment gameplay. It just ensures that something is not completely broken. That would be my take on it.
Shazar, I actually want to follow up super quick with a question that I think you'd best be suited to answer, which is, how do you, abstract game physics, things like jumping, wall bounces? We sort of talked about this in one of the last live streams when we wanted to diagram positioning, and we opted to use time instead. So could you please delve into how you would approach something like that?
Yeah, it depends on the type of game, because when you were talking, for instance, wall jumping, I'm immediately thinking of a game mode like Quake, where you have a rocket launcher, you can shoot the floor and launch yourself into the air and take no damage, for instance. Now it depends on the game you want to do. If you're going for a futuristic type of game with rocket launcher, grenades, I don't know, plasma guns, stuff like that, it's going to be more complicated to make an abstraction of these. Again, wall bouncing and taking cover, it still kind of counts into player skill. Like if you watch me play Quake and see how I try to wall bounce, you're going to see that I'm pretty ineffective at it. So wall bouncing probably, as a concrete example, would probably tie down to accuracy and mobility. So if I were to include it in my current model that I had with the 6 parameters, I would probably, for instance, if I have a rocket launcher and I put it in the hands of a good player, instead of having a low mobility because the player is running around with the rocket launcher, I can have that player have a high mobility because they know how to wall bounce and they're gonna fly all over the map. So it still comes down to abstractization in the end, and really how you choose to implement it. I can't give a universal answer for this. It comes down to how you consider it to be.
So going back to mobile shooters, Alex, we have quite a few questions lined up. The first one is, designing gimmick weapons, right? And this is a question I really like, because they have to be fun, but at the same time, they can't be used for competitive purposes. It's like one of these cards in Hearthstone where, it's a really fun card. You build a deck around it. When RNG is in your favor and you top deck it at the right time, it creates a feel-good moment. But, you can't take that deck and compete with it in the meta or, in Legend or any of that. So how do you design to make a gimmick weapon that's fun to play, but at the same time, is balanced in the sense that, its craziness cannot be used competitively?
Oh, excellent question. I guess it depends on, at least the way I would tackle something like that would be balancing its own gimmick with the stats it's got. So if it's a weapon, it was probably going to fit within the same stat system that we mentioned earlier. But let's say, for example, let's take a stupid example. Let's say the DJ deck from Pixel Gun 3D. So Pixel Gun is essentially if Minecraft was a mobile shooter, and one of the weapons that they've got is a DJ deck, and where every time you shoot, it just emits a like an AoE damage wave around you and knocks players backwards. Now, if I wanted that to be completely hilarious, more of a gimmick but less of a kind of competitive way of doing things, you can just limit things like how wide its AoE damage is, whether it deals AoE damage or only deals a small amount of knockback. You can deliberately make them worse, but make the kind of like the feature of them unique and interesting, so much so that players will try and mess around with them. For example, if it was a rocket launcher that also flew you out around different places, good old Quake style, then, but I wanted that to be not a meta-defining playstyle, then I can just reduce its damage by half, and suddenly it gets out-damaged by everything, and from a competitive standpoint, it drops out of favor, but would still be a hilarious gimmick that I have no doubt players will mess around and play with and enjoy. From a mobile standpoint, I might not even try to make that gimmick anti-meta. I might just try and make it, okay, cool, we've got this really hilarious gimmick. I don't know, it's a flamethrower, it's great. It's got this little niche of if you come within range of it and it has ammo left, it's going to absolutely demolish you. But because it's so specific, maybe it just won't have that much of an impact on the meta that way, so it doesn't need to be weakened to specifically make sure. It depends on the weapon itself and what kind of zany meta you want to have. I mean, if you want a frag meta, I mean, frag is all completely ridiculous. You've got a zombie with a chainsaw that jumps half the map whenever you press a button. That's hilarious for getting into close quarters, taking down bunkers. You can also throw yourself off the edge of the map and die. So it depends what you want to do with it and what kind of meta you want to build.
Makes sense, yeah. And actually, when we're talking about balance, we have a question about, how level design affects balance, right? Like when you're introducing new levels, how do you, do you design the levels based on weapon stats and you set up cover points accordingly? Or does designing new levels with like a really cool objective make you rethink current weapon stats to account for that?
So at least for me, I have previously, I will preface this with I'm personally not a level designer, but I've worked with level designers in the past. We normally have at least the bare bones understanding of what the weapons are going to be, what kind of game modes they're going to be. And then we build levels for game modes. So we build them for objectives. And then normally with that in mind, we will take, so let's say, for example, it's a control point mode and it's a particularly small map. So, you're walking around, you're more than likely than not going to be in range to hit someone with the majority of weapons. So then it becomes a case of, okay, the level design is clearly incentivizing players to use these kinds of weapons. Does this break balance? Is the meta interesting in this kind of space? Do I need to open it out a little more to enable a bit more variety? Maybe make things like, maybe make elevation, sniper towers. Maybe it's useful to have that kind of verticality in the level. But normally, I'll admit, normally they're built around game modes and making sure that the game mode is interesting itself. I haven't designed specifically where specific weapons are used in specific modes or in specific levels. So normally it's been a case of, okay, we're just going to have to bear in mind that, let's say, for example, it's a battle royale mode. the map's really big. Players are probably going to pick relatively good mobility because they need to move a lot, but there may well come a guy that comes in with a rocket launcher and just starts taking people out from long range, and suddenly the game's over by the time like the area has barely shrunk. And that's a consideration that needs to be in mind, mainly when the elements kind of come together. But in terms of influence to weapon design, it's more, does the level design need to shift, or do our weapons fit with this current level design? And can players use specific things? And is that choice interesting?
One of the other questions we had is related to controls, right? So how do you feel about, offering multiple control schemes, things like auto aim, manual fire, and how that affects player dynamics and gameplay?
Oh, I love this because we needed to skip this because of because of time. So again, I'll preface this with I'm a mobile designer, so I can't really speak for specifically for PC controls. At least with mobile, players that play FPS games expect ways, rather than multiple control schemes like an advanced option or a simple option. They more prefer to tweak these things on an individual basis. Critical Ops is a really good example of this because they enable everything. You can move your buttons around on screen to wherever you want to put them. You can hide them if you want so that you don't see the buttons while playing. You can, when it comes to things like aim assist and sort of like aimbot sort of style features, you can increase and decrease the sensitivity of those on a slider. Things like that are really, really important to hardcore mobile FPS players, especially since a first-person view is probably the most challenging to introduce to a player, specifically a mobile player, of all. So if you are making an FPS on mobile and you want that kind of like challenging viewpoint, you know that players are only going to be able to see in one direction at a time. All of this information that's going on around them is going to kind of either be hidden or need to have some kind of notification for, and that can get in the way of a lot of buttons because you've got move. Sometimes you've also got jump and crouch and ADS and all these other things that players then have to learn. And on top of that, you've also got their thumbs in the way of the screen. So their hands actually actively get in the way of what's going on. So it can be very difficult to balance that. So giving players the option to move them around to themselves, to their own liking, can really, really help out. When it comes to things, again, sort of we touched on aim assists, auto shoot systems. It sort of depends on the game you want to make. So normally I try to design, previously I've tried to design quite twitch-based controls. So you're controlling aiming all the time, you're controlling movement all the time. And having to lift your right thumb off of the screen to then hold a fire button and then start aiming again can sometimes be a bit much. Not for everybody, but can sometimes be a bit much for the majority of your audience. So having an auto shoot option is a great way to bypass that and enable players to just go in and start playing with a gun. Can take a little bit of tutorialization, but it's possible. Although, of course, with that said, players will also ask to turn it off and have a fire button somewhere at their choice so that they have better control. It depends on the kind of game you want to make. You could remove movement. I mean, that's led to a whole genre of mobile games called tactical shooters, where you spawn in a particular place, you don't move. You can just aim around and then you can hit the fire button whenever you want to do it. And they're designed well, they can be great experiences. It just depends what you're sort of initially going for, kind of thing. Yeah, there's pros and cons to both, but it does depend on the game you want to make. There are, of course, exceptions to this as well. So Pixel Gun 3D and Mech Arena They enable movement, they enable aiming, and they enable firing all at once. In fact, Mech Arena actually lets you fire because you've got 2 guns on your mech, you can fire them separately. So they've got 3 fire buttons, one for firing both, one for firing left, and one for firing right. And it makes the gameplay more challenging, but if you can get an audience that is really into that and really sort of like the hardcore style, like dedicated, I want this level of control, then by all means go for it.
Awesome. That was a very, very detailed reply. Very insightful, Alex. Thanks so much for that. So yeah, I think we're done with the Q&As and what we're going to be doing now. So actually, I mentioned in the beginning that we're going to be sort of turning off the recording, but we're actually not going to be doing that. We're going to continue with the recording, but we invite anyone who wants to join us on the stage, ask us a question directly, use the raise hand feature and we'll bring you up and we'll just have a chat about game design, more of like a roundtable discussion. So anyone who wants to come up, we encourage you to do that. And yeah, we can continue the conversation for a while. So Alex, while people are joining us, there were a few things you wanted to touch upon. I think now would be a good chance to sort of go back and go through them.
So, I mean, to be fair, the only other thing that I sort of wanted to mention was because when you sent the email out of the webinar, you mentioned best practices for mobile shooters, and I sort of wrote up a kind of section of the script that ended up being 3 times longer than it actually needed to be. I'm very sorry about that one. Of just sort of like almost best practices for mobile shooters. So rather than talking about sort of like the things that we've mentioned before, I just kind of wanted to mention sort of 3 things that I think are quite important when you are designing your own mobile first-person shooter. If anybody fancies tackling the challenge of it. So number 1, design for player skill. This probably sounds like really wishy-washy, but like it doesn't matter how good your balance is or how detailed your Machinations model is in terms of taking into account cover and an overall player's skill and how long they've been playing. When it's in-game, players are always going to beat your expectations. So you kind of need to just look at as many different play styles as possible and make sure that they're not completely overpowered by another. It's kind of common sense to design for strengths and weaknesses, but we've spoken a lot about making sure that that sort of like the overall game's meta is interesting, and you can only really do that by balancing play styles against play styles. There have been a lot of times where I'm like, I don't understand why this particular weapon is so overpowered, because it's actually, if I look at the balance sheets for it, it's weaker than many others, and it's less about the weapon itself and it's more about the playstyle in which it's used. So it's important to always remember that player skill is a factor. The second being focus on your audience. Again, very generic advice, but the FPS perspective, to a lesser extent third person as well, but the first person perspective is essentially the most hardcore and heaviest in terms of cognitive load style of gameplay to introduce a player to. There's a huge amount that they have to bear in mind on a moment-to-moment basis, and if they do it wrong, especially if it's a more hardcore shooter where death can happen in about half a second, you're suddenly immediately dead, and you have to then figure out why and improve your skill at that. Some players love it. It can also be a massive barrier of entry for early or less hardcore fans. It's why a lot of it's why something like War Robots got so popular so quickly, because it's got all of the big heavy decisions that you need to make about when to push, when to come back, when to fire, when to not. But you're in a giant mech, and they make the giant mech move about the speed of like a caterpillar. So these decisions take place over a longer period of time so that the audience has time to make those decisions and then act on them. So it becomes less about your skill in reacting to the decision, and instead it's about making the decision and making the right one at a time. War of Tanks is built on the same kind of idea. So yeah, yeah. I don't know why I sort of fell over there, forgive me. And then finally, is kind of something that I've learned just through various projects. Make bots, and make bots really good. And by good, I don't mean make them really strong and absolutely murder everybody, but just make them believable. It's especially for a game in soft launch or early launch, it can be extremely difficult to get concurrent users to a high enough level that anyone in any region can press the play button and fill a 10-player game within 10 seconds. That's almost never going to happen. And then you've got something like Arena Free Fire that needs to do it in the same length of time, but for 60 people. Even how big that game is, that game has bots. There are going to be fake players wandering around, and it enables you to control the experience. Make sure that like early players are put into situations where they get to feel good about using something you've given them. Like, let's say game 3, you give them this new gun and they're like, oh, I have no idea how to use this. Oh, it shoots really quickly. If you just give them a load of dummy bots that are going to miss more often than not, it can just be really fun to absolutely muller people and just see the sort of like double kill, triple kill, quadruple kill come up. And having that kind of control can really help your sort of day 0 to day 7 kind of demographics. It's also really good to be able to provide a competent challenge for late game players, because if someone sticks in your game long enough that they get to the point where they're so far up the leaderboards that matchmaking them with anyone other than like the very top percentage of your players is just bad news for the other player, then you can still provide them with a challenge. And an interesting game and something that they can hop in for 4 minutes and put down again and feel like they had a pretty good time with that. Yeah, bots are very important. Those are the 3 I came up with. But yeah, that's my script. I've run out of stuff on it now. I believe we've tackled everything. Yeah.
Right. Well, Alex, I think you've intimidated everyone. So, is there anything else you want to go over? Because it seems everyone's too intimidated to join us on the stage. So, if there's anything you want to go over, or if anyone wants to come up on the stage, I mean, we're pretty much winding down now. So.
You don't have to join necessarily. Even if you have any questions, you can just ask. Machinations related, or mobile shooter related, or game design related at this point, actually. So,
right.
Yeah, we can sit and talk game design. How's everybody's knowledge on trading card games? That's within the scope of this talk, right?
So, trading card game. We actually live streamed that. Me and Cesar last week, we sort of did the dynamic of trading. We didn't include like the meta of actually using those traded cards to battle. We didn't account for all the trading scenarios, but we sort of, had a pool of friends playing the game, and how, when there's a trading card game with like maximum limit, how having one more friend join changes the dynamic of trading and changes, how fast people trade, and, how they look at duplicates and how they prioritize power level of cards. And so that was pretty fun. Yeah. Are you working on something trading card game related?
I have a pet project. Well, I say I have a pet project. I've had a pet project for about 2 years now, and I haven't done anything with it for a while. I've been trying to design a Magic set. So I've been mainly looking at with a piece of software called Magic Set Editor. So I've just been messing around with like different card levels, different effects. I've got them all like power curved out. The idea is to kind of like turn it into a cube, like a draft cube, and then like print them all out and just kind of like play a few games with friends. I've been a big Magic fan for a long time. I just need to actually get to the point of testing them and making sure that I'm not just, I haven't got one dominating strategy, or one of my strategies is completely destroyed by everything else. So that was the main reason why I guess it sprang to my mind about. But yeah, so we've got a bit of a pet project going on. Nothing professional, but yeah, a little bit of a pet project. It's always good to have side projects while you're doing things. But yeah, I mean,
yeah, the thing about these side projects is that you don't really have to worry about the scope getting out of hand, or dealing with the nature of the beast and the multifaceted team that comes with making a game, and you can just focus on the design and finding the fun, and it's a really good chance to hone your craft as a designer.
Yeah, for sure, definitely. Some of the most interesting interesting lessons I've learned from a game design perspective have been screwing up in either game jams or pet projects. Always good fun. But yeah, I mean, hey guys, if there's no other questions, thank you so much for having me. It's been really good fun to talk. I hope I didn't come across as too terrified in the initial answer. And yeah, Cesar specifically, but the diagrams are flipping amazing, buddy. The stuff that you pull out in 2 hours is like the stuff that I would like to be able to do within, say, a month. Very impressive, man.
Thank you. I do tend to work better under pressure, so.
Yeah. Sounds good. And yes, in the chat, that is a GameCube. Of course, it's a GameCube.
Alex, this has been wonderful. I think you aced it. I think we all got a lot of insight. I think it was fun to just kick back and talk mobile shooters and sort of the difference. Because the reality is, even though we didn't touch up on PC shooters, a lot of the answers you gave sort of made, my brain think, oh, okay, that's actually a different approach than if you would do it on PC. So I think naturally you sort of get the understanding of how it's different to design for mobile. So thank you so much for taking the time and joining us today. And you aced it. That was really good. Great script.
I am so glad that I didn't make a complete fool of myself. But no, it was good fun. And yeah, it's funny how a lot of the lessons from mobile and PC can kind of overlap, but then the differences can also be relatively large too. It's good fun. It's good fun to design for, I gotta say. It always keeps you on your toes.
Right. And I also wanted to thank everyone in the chat and everyone who's still sticking around. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you for sharing your questions. Yeah, it's been real fun. We'll have another webinar coming up next month. We'll update everyone once we have a few things locked in. So looking forward to that. And thanks again, Alex, and thank you, Cesar, as always. So thank you, everyone, and we'll see you soon.